Come on out to Mississauga, it's the greatest place around. Where on a quiet evening you can watch the sun go down. And if you should need a friend, there are plenty to be found. That's why everybody loves that good old Mississauga.
Hello, and thank you for joining us here on Ask a Historian. I'm Matthew Wilkinson, historian with Heritage Mississauga. Please send in your questions to history@heritagemississauga.org as we explore the fascinating stories of Mississauga together. Like, subscribe, and follow us and stay up to date on all the heritage happenings with Heritage Mississauga. As part of this program, we will be exploring memories, moments, and milestones from the past 50 years with past and present civic leaders as part of the City of Mississauga's 50th anniversary. On this week's episode, we are excited to be joined by City of Mississauga Ward 6 Councillor Joe Horneck as we explore his personal perspectives of moments and milestones for the City of Mississauga's 50th anniversary. Thank you, Councillor Horneck, for joining us here with Moments and Milestones, and really appreciate you taking the time to explore some of your personal memories of the city with us.
Yeah, definitely. Love to be here. Love to be here.
Well, let's jump right in. You're a resident of the city. You're obviously a councillor in the city. But what are your own connections to the city of Mississauga? When did the city become home to you?
So for me, it'd be about 13 years ago. So I'm not one of those people who can say I'm the lifelong resident. I grew up in the city of Windsor. I've, lived in a number of places around the world in my career in finance and banking before I moved to Mississauga. So yeah, I mean, I experienced the city as an adult. I had my first child already before we came to the city, and now we've had two subsequent kids. So it's been great raising a family in the city, and that's honestly. Why didn't I go to Oakville? Why didn't I go to other places in the GTA? It was about, a place that I thought we could best raise our family, that we could have at the time, being a banker and have that great connectivity to downtown Toronto and yet, be able to raise a family comfortably and affordably. And so, I I always loved the look of the Mississauga Rex programs and parks, the quiet suburban neighborhoods that we were at the time. And, so for me, it's funny how now, even before I became a councillor, I'd now no longer used my GO train connection. I live just a few blocks from the Arundel station. I don't go downtown anymore, obviously, right? And my wife was the same. She was in the hospital network, doing research. And again, she thought her whole career would be going into Toronto, and now she works for the public school board as a researcher there. So it's funny how we came in with one particular, we're going to be commuters, we're going to go into Toronto. And that just isn't the way that life panned out. And I think it's, to the positive. It's been great. But it also speaks to the changes in the city, right? We're not just a city of commuters. We're a city that has a net positive inflow of jobs every single day, of people coming to our industrial parks and our businesses all over the city to, drive our economy and put food on the table for people.
I remember a discussion one time. It said Mississauga has we were the exporter of workers. Now we're the importer. So
that's true. It's very true. It's very true.
So did you have knowledge of the city prior to moving in? I'm fascinated to explore what drew you to the city. And
yeah, I had an aunt and uncle who lived in the Sawmill Valley area for a long time. And so I remember as a kid coming and visiting them, and I remember walking the trails of Sawmill Valley in particular and just being, oh, these are just so amazing.
Right.
That was one thing that really stuck with me from a young age. And as an adult, I had a couple of friends from university who I kind of knew. And for me, those are the kinds of things, like I said, that were just drawing me into the city.
Yeah. Were there things that jumped, like, attracting you to the city? You're arriving 13 years ago, I think you said, and you went like, I'm excited to learn more about this, or this is drawing me here. This is whether I don't know whether it's a park or a connection to like Square One would be a good example. But what was there something that jumps out at you that said that drew me to the city, or you wanted to explore further?
I mean, so for me, I think it was actually the parks I thought were a really interesting thing to explore. So for me, I'm very near Riverwood.
Okay.
And that's a great asset to have in my neighborhood. Deer Run Park and all the other parks that are like quick walking distance to me were always a great, decision as to why we bought the house where we bought, right? Mm-hmm. We had the GO station, we had this connection to nature. We were right next to the downtown. it had everything you wanted
Right.
in a neighborhood for kids.
That's actually a good
And
slogan for the city, isn't it? It has everything you want.
it is. It is. I also think it's aspirational for like how much can we continue to maintain that despite the fact that we're now a really deeply changing city, right?
Mhm.
Like we're growing up, we're not growing out. And I guess one aspect I would want to be memorable of this particular moment in time in Mississauga's history is that we are a city that thought of itself as purely a suburb. And I don't think we think of that anymore. And I think when we think of ourselves as a suburb, we don't think about things like homelessness, and we don't think about things like basement apartments and housing density, and we don't think about speeds on our streets. And so when we built this city, and we built it in a very deliberate way as a suburb with strong industrial sectors, you could feel like you could go as fast as you wanted and there were no consequences. You could feel like you don't have to worry about density because everybody's got a big green leafy lot. And now we're in a totally different place. And I think it's interesting. We have to talk about a better bus system, not just a minimalist bus system.
Right.
And I think people who watch this into the future 20 years from now will be like, yeah, duh. Like in downtown Mississauga, we have an 80 plus story building going up. I think it's 82 stories at M City.
Yeah.
Like that's not a suburb. That's the largest building outside of the city of Toronto in the country.
Yep.
So, I mean, I think there's a real mentality from long-term residents who've been here, who, remember this deeply as a suburb, who've been here for decades and raised their families, and the people more like me who've come in the last, 15 years or so. And there's a lot of us who turn over the city.
Yep.
Because we think of it as a city.
Yep. It's a different perspective, and I'd be curious to explore that with you a little bit. I mean, you're here for 13 years. I would arguably say that those 13 years have probably seen the biggest change our city has ever seen to this point. And here you are now having a hand in charting that course. But the city in your eyes, if you think back, 13 years doesn't feel like a long period of time, but you would have seen already a significant amount of change.
Absolutely. And, and even just on the political side, I saw, excuse me.
Yep.
I saw the tail end of, Mayor McCallion's term of office. I got to know her a tiny bit. I know her granddaughter quite well. And so she was an influential person on the city. Like nobody can talk. I mean, even as a city councilor, I feel like we almost can't go 5 meetings without somehow in some way mentioning Mayor McCallion, right? And so I was here primarily with Mayor Crombie, who I got to know right when I moved to the city, to be honest, through a mutual friend, and worked with her through her campaigns and supported her. But even her, she had that hangover legacy where whatever subject it was that would come up, and I would watch council, even though I wasn't a councilor for 8 years. Nothing could happen without pivoting back to, well, what would Mayor McCallion think about that? And so in that sense, even when she wasn't mayor, she really held people's minds. And that was a positive in a lot of the civic consciousness and community building and positivity towards new cultures and integrating people and all that stuff. And in some ways, it also, though, held back our suburban mentality.
Right.
And so we weren't as honest about needing a better bus system. We weren't as honest about, maybe a few other issues that we could have been more forthcoming on.
Yes. Now, are there, I'm struggling way to ask the question, but physical changes that you've seen that, that are really impactful in the city. Like it could be things that are in front of us that are in process now. I'm thinking the LRT line and bus rapid transit and all those, the vision sessions and stuff. But in those 13 years, or even reflecting the time that you've been on council, are there some changes that you've seen that you think are kind of monumental to that the evolution of the city?
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned the LRT. That's a great example of something. I mean, we're close, but it's not done.
Yeah.
And we're waiting. So that will be a big fundamental change to that section of the city. And we're doing things around it that are different too. Even when we had apartment buildings or condo building, we used to basically say, well, one apartment, one parking spot. Everyone thereby must drive.
Yeah.
And just in the term that I've been on council now for the 2 years, we've really gotten away from that, and we've dropped that down to half a car for every spot. And now we're not even sure if we need half a car.
Yeah.
Because on that line, when we've got that kind of high frequency transit, we should be able to support people who don't want to purchase a car. And the other side is because of the affordability that's just gone bananas in the 13 years since I've been here. Like I bought my house, I'll just tell you, for a little over $700,000. And I mean, now it would go for well over double that.
Yeah.
And I don't know how somebody who, what was it, 32 when I came here, I don't know how my wife and I could have afforded that despite having two very, well-paying jobs.
Yep.
So I think in other physical things, I think you'd say is it's the skyline, right? Like we have a skyline. You can see it from quite a distance. It really is very noticeable. And that was fractions of what it is today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's more coming, right? All the time. There's lots of cranes in the air.
I marvel at that change of the downtown core in a very short period of time. I mean, you talk about going vertical, but it's really, particularly at night when all the lights are on, like it's so noticeable that skyline is evolving. There was a time when the Sussex Centre was the big building.
Yeah. And we did in council in many cases, like some of those buildings they're unique. Like not every one of them, but there's a few really unique ones. The Absolute Towers, the Marilyn Monroe.
Yep.
They've got the shapiness to them, but there's a few others that kind of have a bit of, interesting context and tension. The M cities,
Yep.
The fact that many of them have the lights at the top, the LEDs that kind of add, like you say, some color in the evenings, and make it more interesting. So it's good that we're not just building gray boxes in the sky.
Well, you want to encourage, I'm assuming at some point in your evolution or your planning thought as a councillor, you want to encourage excellence in your city too, right? You want to encourage expression and interest.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think there is something, the major cities of the world often have buildings that are architecturally interesting and significant, and that it breeds a sense of a city that's on the move. It shows that you're kind of on the edge of what's happening right now in terms of look and style. You can't think of New York and not think of the Empire State Building, right? You can't think of many of the buildings in Chicago and not, immediately go, oh, I'm looking at Chicago.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think in the same text, by having these unique buildings, it does say something about our city's aspirations, and that we have interest in being more than just gray boxes in the sky, like I say. And that's a good thing, right? It spills out into your community. I hope it makes you feel more proud about your community.
Yeah. I love the fact for us that our civic core is truly at the center of that evolving urban space, if you will. And I think that speaks well for the city growth in time as well for me. Anyway, that's my own perspective.
Yeah. And I think Celebration Square is a real amazing, it's a good achievement, and it's full all the time, constantly. Even 5 years ago, somebody could roll up and go, oh, I want to hold a big event in about a month. And we had space available.
Yeah.
And now people queue up and they're desperate, and we're turning people away because we don't have enough space in the months that are nice. And so that's a real turnaround too. And a lot of that is because of the density around that area, but also it's a function of knowing it better. Councillor Fonseca was telling me a story the other day that when she first came on council, there used to be a road that ran right through the middle of it.
Yep.
And one of her first major decisions that was really contentious was Mayor McCallion and some councillors didn't want to get rid of the road. And others are like, how can we have this big square and keep a road in the middle of it? And now you look at it and you're like, of course. What are you talking about having a road through it? That's crazy talk. So, I mean, it's amazing how the city can change. And even in a small number of years, 5, now it's busting full.
Yep.
5 years ago, it was busy. It had busy times for sure. It had some successful festivals, but we weren't turning people away.
I know I fielded some concerns or complaints over the availability of space, and I always, my opinion is a good problem to have, right?
It is a good problem to have. And now we're talking about second venues someplace.
Yep. But it speaks to the vibrancy of the city, and I think that's a wonderful thing to have. So it's, I'm sure you are involved or get asked to be involved in numerous organizations that contribute to the city. And I'm just wondering if you can give a hat tip to some of the ones either you're connected with or you feel have played a significant role in kind of the city mentality, city identity, if you will, those support systems within the city that are so crucial to our civic life.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll say just in my personal experience, the two groups that I spent the most time on before becoming a councillor, Arma House, which is a place for women and children who are fleeing domestic violence. That was an interesting period. I was the treasurer for 6 years. The banker becomes the treasurer.
Yep.
And that was a good example of a place in transition. The house that they had was very, old and had a very, very limited capacity. And that capacity had not changed since the early 90s. But with the explosion of the population, both here and in Brampton, they required a substantial size increase.
Yep.
And that was contentious. That was a good example of where we had some neighbors who were not interested in seeing more things happen on a green space.
Yep.
And we had that push pull that we now feel with that suburbanness. But that got done, and I think that's a great asset to the city because we know we have to be honest that we do have challenges in the city of homelessness and the domestic abuse, and we need to have the facilities for that. And we were a leafy suburb. A lot of that was hidden away. It was hidden away in basements, and we didn't talk about it as much as maybe we should have. We didn't build out things like places for the food bank. And now the food bank is renting and spending a lot of money on itself. The food bank was something I did try to help out a little bit on. But the other group I'd say was a group called the basically it was a transit committee. There's a group lobbying for more public transit. And it was through the auspices of Shelley White and Brian Crombie. And Mayor McCallion had asked them to put it together. I spent a lot of time on that, like looking to have some more public transit and, aspiring to have more GO trains and buses to help our city keep moving better. Because we felt like at the time we were really behind, and that was before the LRT was announced. So
Right.
I spent a lot of time doing that. I think there's a lot of iconic groups in the city. Like I mentioned also Riverwood. That's
Yes.
one for me. Our river trail system is amazing. It's a real gem of the city. It's often on, best places to visit lists.
Mhm.
And, we have the Salmon Run, we have the Fall Colors. It's a great place. They do so much programming also there with kids, with different age groups, with our Aboriginal community. So that's a wonderful place. And then maybe also I'd say just the Mississauga Arts Council as well. Mike Douglas and his group, they do quite a lot to try to help bring that kind of culture to our city and highlight artists that are in the city. And I think again, that's a thing you'd expect to see from a more developed city.
Yeah.
We're not a city that's going to have a museum full of Rembrandts and Picassos and whatever. That's not our thing. We're not that ancient city. We're a modern city, and so
Yeah.
it's a bit of a different thing, right? It's more live performance. It's more highlighting new artists, and that's a role that they often play, and I appreciate.
Again, that's a vibrancy. It speaks to the kind of the multifaceted nature of our city as well. And I always get a chuckle. My kids do we always as a family do the fall walk down the Credit River Valley. I grew up in Arundel Village, so the River was our backyard, and my kids have come to call it the Stinky Fish Walk. So
Yes, yes. Well, and I think the other thing just to not neglect too would be just like there's so many like honestly like literally too many to name different ethno-cultural groups that do
Absolutely.
all sorts of wonderful things to highlight their communities and bring people together in different either it's a festival, it's highlighting a celebration in the community, it's something at their local church or synagogue or whatever it is, right? I mean, and that okay. So yeah, I was talking to a resident just the other day, and he was talking about the food scene in Mississauga, and there he belongs to a large prestigious university from India, and they were looking to where are they going to have their annual event that they bring former students together, and it was Houston, Texas, or it was Mississauga, and
Wow.
Mississauga won out because we had the great air connection, but most important, food scene, right?
Wow.
Our South Asian food scene is what really drew people. And he went so far as that he had like a whole thing he wanted to present to Mississauga tourism about like drawing in more tourists. He's like, I have relatives come in from all sorts of places. We love to go here, then here, then here, then here, then here, then here. And it's all about the food. That's wonderful. Like,
I do find it marvelous wherever you go, the options that are available to us if you're taking out, and just the grocery options too when you're shopping and stuff is just so much
mhm,
more diverse and exciting than it was years ago. Like it
it
is
is.
fascinating to see. So if you could, and again, this list could be endless, but I'm just kind of looking for kind of a short acknowledgement. But people that you found that are impactful to the city or have made a difference in the city during your time here. Or we could skip that one if it's too many.
I don't know. I mean, I'm probably going to name off the same kinds of people that everybody else are, right? I don't know. Yeah, I think I'm going to skip on that one.
Okay.
I don't
No,
like giving, yeah. I don't
well,
like doing shout outs for myself. I'm not a very like,
fair,
look at me kind of person.
fair.
So
Well, I was
I
gonna
don't know.
say, I think we've had a lot of, obviously Hazel and the past leaders as well, and those
Yeah.
who sat in the chairs before you, those that had visions for the city. And even though that vision changes, you acknowledge kind of the work that gets done over time. So
Yeah.
we've been talking backwards a little bit in terms of where we've seen the city come from, and how about we prognosticate a little bit and see where it's going in your eyes. If we could look ahead to the next 50 years,
Mhm.
where do you have a wish for the city, or do you have a vision for the city of what you think things will come to the city, or how the city will evolve in 50 years?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so I think in the next 50 years, if we're successful, then what I think I'd want to do is go back to the things that attracted me to the city in the first place, a great place to raise a family. And so keeping up those parks and recreation places and vibrant food scenes and all those kinds of things we have going for us right now, but be able to do it in a more dense environment. Like the city's going to become more dense, both with major urban centers and large towers, but also within the neighborhoods themselves. Like one of the moments in time we're at right now is that demographically, the leafy neighborhoods are hollowing out.
Yeah,
I live on a street of like 16 houses, and most of those houses only have two people, despite being four-bedroom houses.
yeah,
So when they were built in 1980, you would have had the 2.5 kids,
yeah,
and now there's only two houses with children, and that includes mine.
yeah.
So it's not the same anymore. And, I'm happy to see a couple of my neighbors have put in basement apartments, and I'm okay with that. And I think that's the change that's really going to happen, right? Is yes, we're going to become more dense in the major places like the downtown core, the Huron-Ontario core, up in Meadowvale on major avenues. Other major arterials will get more dense, but we'll always have these leafy neighborhoods of single detached houses. But even within them, they're going to change. They're going to be a bit different. They're going to have a couple of families or a couple of whatever you define a family to be
Yeah.
in a single home and not just one standalone place. Not everywhere, not everywhere, but more frequently than we have today. And so I
Yeah.
want to keep those good things with all the places that we love about the city, and be able to meld in more new residents as Mississauga always has.
And I think that's maybe an important perspective to have, is that it's never about standing still, right? There's always an
Never.
evolution. There's always as things are evolving and changing in time, you're dealing with what comes before you, the needs, right?
Yeah. And I think we can build a lot of great places for people to come, like more pedestrian areas. We can build out another venue to match Celebration Square, hopefully. Maybe we should, some convention space in the downtown core would be great.
Yeah.
There's a lot of projects that if we can get them going would be really beneficial. Like we don't have a stadium in the downtown core. Is that a possibility? It gets harder as time has gone on because councils before us didn't save the land. And so
Right.
can we do that? Now we've got to assemble the land. It's much harder.
Right.
But I mean, these are things that if they were to take off tomorrow, they'd be wildly successful.
Right.
So I mean, I'd love to see more. I'd love to see a pedestrian street. Kind of, if you want to take back a little bit of history, why do we not have a pedestrian street someplace
Yeah.
in Park Credit or Streetsville or Clarkson or any of these places, Cooksville?
Yeah.
There's lots of places you could put it. And
Yeah.
so I'd love to see that. Traveling around the world, that's some of the best shopping areas, it's some of the best restaurant areas would be have a pedestrian street. So I will be disappointed if I end my term on council, whatever that will come,
Yeah.
and not have seen something to help encourage that.
I'm having spent some time in New York City this summer very briefly. I was amazed to find some pedestrian streets. It was neat. It's doable. Like you
I
can
was
make it happen. So
I came back from Lisbon. It's the same thing. And I lived in the UK for 3 years.
okay.
I traveled to a lot of Europe, and it's rare to find a major city in Europe that doesn't have pedestrian streets in
Right.
some places.
I think it's a fascinating thing to aspire to. Not one you often hear in the discourse either. It's more about, like you said, traffic and transit and all those sorts of things. But creating people places is good too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So with that, I just, I wish you the very best on council and moving forward. I know it's there's always the juggle act going on, and I want to thank you for taking time to not only explore your own personal memories and connections and stories around the city and aspirations for the city, but also to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the city. And so this is quite a milestone for us. Here you are, sitting on council, looking forward to 50 years, and who knows who's sitting in that chair 50 years from now and making decisions based on things that you built. So,
Who knows? In
yeah,
2 years, I've seen two mayors as well.
it's
That's,
true.
it's like almost half the population of the mayors in 50 years.
Very much so. Very much so. Anyway, with that, thank you so much. Wish you the very best, and happy
Thanks.
50th to the city.
Thank you. Happy 50th.
Thank you for spending some time with us here at Ask a Historian. And thank you also to Ward 6 Councillor Joe Horneck for sharing his moments, memories, and milestones with us for the City of Mississauga's 50th anniversary. Like, subscribe, and follow us, and we will see you on future episodes of Ask a Historian.